Hello, welcome to K-Math. Today I want to talk about skincare from an evolutionary perspective. I'm not a doctor, and so I'm not qualified to give medical advice, but treat this more as a journal reflection and just some potentially food for thought. So take it with a grain of salt. But to understand what we're going to talk about today, let's just go over a little bit of an overview of kind of how really skin works and trying to make sense of what exactly is happening when we use skin products and what happens when, we don't, and so forth. And understanding why will help us to make, logical connections between the steps we're trying to conclude, which is that most soaps are irrelevant and a lot of skin products for treating acne and having healthy skin are kind of also irrelevant as well. To begin with this, let's first kind of look at this skin. So we have this in multiple layers, right? The skin's in multiple layers with the epidermis on the top, then we have the dermis below it. Um, New skin will be generated down here, and as they come increasingly older, they'll just go up and up. So the hair follicles are completely dead skin cells, and these are connected to the dermis and are going outside, protruding to the open air. Over here we have this sebaceous gland, which is going to be very important in our later discussions. This is a gland that produces the oil sebum that comes out of the hair and into the skin. This acts as a waxy, kind of moisturizing, naturally produced oil that keeps our skin healthy, moisturized, and with a diverse microbial biome. So this is very good for us, and this is how we, keep our bodies moisturized and our skin clean. But the problem with, the modern day um, thoughts of sterilization and sanitation is that we have to constantly keep ourselves this notion of squeaky clean. And this means using body soap, using shampoo, and using conditioner, using moisturizer. But this, in a sense, is kind of contradictory because what's happening when you use body soap is you're literally just removing the oils on the surface of the skin while convincing yourself it's removing dirt and grime. Whereas dirt and grime don't necessarily need soap to be removed because water by itself, which is lipophobic, means that it doesn't, attract uh, oils, would not remove the sebum layer on the top. But using soap removes the sebum layer on the top of the skin, while we think that it's making us cleaner. And then because now our skins are bare and open and potentially at risk for drying out and so other things, we need to put on our topical moisturizers like moisturizers to preserve the moisture and to drag moisture in um, with hydrochloric acid. I'm not sure if I pronounced it right, but the one that pulls liquid into the skin. But isn't that kind of like what you're removing and then you're adding back? It's like the same thing with shampoo and conditioner. You're removing the sebum from the hair, and then you're putting back the moisture into the hair follicles with the conditioner. Wouldn't it just be better to abandon the whole thing and let your body self-regulate? At a certain point, the cosmetic industries are getting a large profit just by getting the money out of you doing this kind of frivolous cycle through your hair, really not accomplishing anything substantial. So let's see what happens. What's the solution to this? Let's see what happens when we just use water itself. But we'll investigate that. I want to also see what happens when we do use body soap and what the potential risks of inflammatory and skin problems can occur as a result of that. So when we use body soap, okay, I don't know where my cursor is going. We use body soap. Okay, what the heck? We're removing the sebum layer, right? We're washing it off. And so now there's no oil production in the surface of our skin. So first thing that happens is we'll need to produce more sebum. This is also attenuated by the case that body soap is around 9 pH, whereas a skin is 4 to 5 pH. So the skin is slightly acidic, but the body makes it more alkaline. And so our body will need to produce more sebum to counterbalance that. And so, what happens when you produce too much sebum, and you have a, increased rate of, skin cell turnover is that you're going to have higher risk for acne. Okay. This is also, let's see how this actually happens, right? We have increased amount of sebum production, but we also have removed this, diverse microbiome on top of the skin, so we can have these, y- you know, fast reproducing bacteria starting to form on the surface of the skin, and these oftentimes will be triggering our immune response system. With the natural sebum layer on top, this would be less likely to happen because the sebum layer focuses on um, regulating the sort of bacteria that is in the skin, and so it would try to keep the good ones alive and try to keep the bad ones in balance. But once we remove that layer, it's kind of really just about who's the most fastest in terms of reproducing. And so the good bacteria may be eradicated and we'll just have the bad bacteria. How these bad bacteria form on the top of the skin, and they trigger our immune response system because our white blood cells want to kill these bacteria. So in we come when there starts to become inflammation because we have white blood cells coming to try to eradicate these bacteria. And as a result of that, you're having constricting of this pore canal. Um, the the sebum becomes more viscous and thicker, so it's harder to ooze out. And more white, you're also producing more skin cells because the body is trying to turn over because it know that its body is fighting up here. Because there's more action happening up here, the body wants to adapt for more skin cells to come out of the body, of the skin, so that it can, produce and stabilize. However, this goes kind of counterintuitive because now the thicker and the more white blood cells will begin to clog up this layer. So in this narrowed out canal, this area, we're beginning to clog it up. So we have a lot of dead cells and viscous sebum, and it's clogging this up. And if pus forms and this wall breaks, and we have just pus everywhere, it becomes a pimple. So, you can see the problem occurs there, and this happened as a result of us losing the sebum layer of the skin and needing to overproduce and sebum and having like the bacteria that would have been, prevented if we had that natural sebum layer on the top. This could have all been prevented if we simply just, kept the sebum layer on the top of the skin. But we didn't, and so now we have to deal with this problem. So let's first look at what modern medicine will tell you to do in this current situation. So we have inflammation here, right? And what the doctors will tell you to do is you get a variety of medicines. Some of these will be like benzoyl peroxide, will have salicylic acid, certain retinoids, and antibiotic treatments. I just want to see what all this does to this piece of inflammation. And we'll notice that with all of these, what's really happening is that we're not solving the cause of the problem. We're solving the symptoms of the problem. So if a house were to be leaking from the ceiling and the puddle formed on the bottom, we would be sweeping the puddle and not actually fixing the leak in the ceiling. So that means treatments like this would be lasting kind of as you'd do them constantly instead of just fixing what's the root of the problem in the first place. Um, yeah, and I think another important note to put out here is as well the fact that I think in our society now the cultural norm is to keep a really high level of sanitation. We assume being completely sterilized, where we have nothing on our skin, means cleanliness. And this could be as a result of health epidemics and COVID. But this entire notion is wrong because our bodies have evolved to constantly be with the environment around us. The microbiomes in our skin, the natural things that we should be inhaling and eating were meant to be kind of um, unadulterated from the very beginning. We had a lot of things that was very complex and we got used to it, right? That was part of the thing. That's what was evolved from nature. So actually putting us in a sterile environment means that we had to add many other additives in order to keep ourselves healthy. It's kind of similar to this notion of allergies, where allergies form as a result of in a modern society where we become increasingly hypersensitized to, allergens, we have these really over-exaggerated symptoms as a result of it. And this wouldn't have happened if we were just regularly exposed to these allergens instead of being kept in a tiny, like a sterilized room as a baby. But culture now says that we'd be sterilized, we have to kind of stay in constantly clean environments, whereas we don't really know what that's doing for us. So I mean, that's just a side note to kind of explain this idea of how these treatments are fixing the symptom of the problem instead of the problem itself. But anyways, let's look at what each thing does. Let's first look at cyclic acid. So cyclic acid helps break down these white blood. Uh, I'm sorry. I mean these. My bad. These dead skin cells that are coming to the top. They'll break them down, and so they can allow the sebum to come out. On a regular cell, let's just say this is another one, right? It's not that inflamed. There's no like immune response happening here. It's just kind of blocked up um, uh, sebum and dead skin cells. So this is kind of similar to a whitehead, or you can be a blackhead as well, right? If you just had a little bit of exposed skin cell or sebum on the top, it can become a blackhead. But with this with this type of thing, we can treat it with cyclic acid, and that would remove the clogged up skin cells and allow for the sebum to come flow back out. So that works there. But again, is you're solving the symptom problem because to fix it and to not get acne in the first place, you can prevent this problem of the too much sebum coming out and too much skin cells coming out and the blocking it up by just keeping our the system in check, which keep it in its natural environment. Um, okay, so that's that. But cyclic acid doesn't work as well when it meets this inflammatory section of the skin. And to see why this happened is because what's really working on when you're doing cyclic acid here is the salicylic acid. I don't know how to pronounce it. I keep on forgetting it. Salicylic acid is that it'll break down the skin cell layers, but that's not fixing the problem at all because the inflammation's still there. They're still producing a bunch of skin cells down here. It's still viscous. It's still narrowed down. It's still narrowed here, right? So, what's only going to happen is that it's going to tell you, oh, we're running out of skin cells. We need more. So it's going to pump up more and more, and it's just going to fill up right again, and nothing's really going to happen from that. And actually, it can make the problem worse if you just do that as a treatment for this type of thing. So that doesn't work either. Now let's look at benzoyl peroxide. Put this back. Benzoyl peroxide will come in, and as an acid, it kills the bacteria on the top, as well as reducing inflammation and killing and removing the dead skin cells in the middle and inside as well. But you working to remove this stuff here, but guess what? This is all sterile again, and you have no sebum production here, right? So your inflammation is going to come back right away. It's not going to be treated unless you constantly apply benzoyl peroxide and constantly keep this in check, which is again mopping the floor of this leaky ceiling. So yes, you can solve your problems with benzoyl peroxide, but it's going to have to be a long-term, indefinite treatment because you're screwed up the system. It's just like shampoo or body wash nowadays, right? Because you've removed the sebum on the layer of the skin, we have to constantly clean it in order to maintain what we believe is this clean feeling. But this is not needed in the first place, right? This is just going to come back up again, right? The bacteria is going to form again, inflammation is going to come again, this is going to come again. We're going to have more sebum production. You wash it crazy, and then just boom, boom, boom happens all over again. So nothing really fixes itself. And so we're back in the same problem again. And I'll talk about retinoids later, but I just want to see what happens now if we just, clean our bodies. with water and no soap. And what will happen, as you see in the first few stages, is that we're going to have maybe a potential increase of a lot more sebum production because we're used to producing a lot more than we need to because we're washing it constantly every day off with soap. But soon after a transition period, maybe say of a month or two or even more, this layer will begin to rejuvenate itself, and our sebaceous gland will kind of regulate itself to a more normal mode of production instead of producing so much all the time. And additionally, like, let's see, will this pimple clear itself, right? What happened, right? When we have this sebaceous layer up again, the microbiome is much better, so the inflammation has less. The bacteria are no longer going to be super prevalent. So, the inflammation may start to tone down a little bit. And once inflammation tones down a little bit, our sebum is going to become a little more cleared out, right? And the cells and the skin cells are not going to be produced as fast. So we're going to have a more normal flow back again, as well as this constricting pathway. The follicle walls will start to come back to their normal structure. And so you'll see this will come back to normal and will produce a normal amount of sebum, which carries the non-sticky skin cells out without clogging it up. So what will happen is you'll see when you don't use any sort of soap is that your body will naturally gain back its sebum on its top of a layer, and cleaning with water will get rid of all the sort of dirt and grime that may accumulate in a day's sort of work without removing this very integral system of our body. And it's been reported that people who often don't have the sebum layer on top will experience symptoms like redness, itchiness, inflammation, rashes, and so forth. And a lot of people who just go off of the soap will soon realize that all these problems will really fix themselves, and it's kind of this miraculous thing. And it's something to think about if you have these problems yourself. But the other thing was interesting was that especially in your areas of your groin or any parts that maybe more odor have more odor and like this cheesy feeling. Even those areas will develop their own sebum layer and may come accommodated to um, a no soap kind of style. I will say though, however, we're not exactly synonymous with hunter-gatherers because we now wear pretty tightly fitted clothing on these parts of our body that are producing odor, like our underwear or our tightly clean shirts. And these produce a kind of moist and hot environment, which may be more prone to creating these bacteria that create the odors which are associated with body odor. And so using soap on those parts may still be a fix to the modern mismatch we have in terms of how our skin is intended to work. But I think it may be worth experimenting to see if that's needed for yourself and whether or not you can do without it. But it's something to consider. Um, yeah, I'll quickly go on a note about this idea of humidity and hotness, and then I'll move to retinoids. But when we have our skin constantly covered by something like a layer of clothing, right? This area inside it creates a more humid and hot sort of ecosystem, and where you have this potential for something evolutionarily mismatched. Um, and just to use a heightened example, say if we're sweating, right, and we're perspirating, and we have a bunch of solid bits of water on top, and it's hot and humid and wet. This presents a problem for us because what will happen is that this water is not like the sebum. It is not regulating the bacteria, but rather it is, just whatever can forms, right? And bacteria flourishes in a warm water situation. So whatever is the most fastly reproducing bacteria will dominate in these water particles. And the thing is, for a lot of these particles, is that they harbor these bacteria, and then a lot of times, if they're on top of a hair follicle like this, they can get inside of the sebum area and reproduce, and here causing inflammation, and the problem restarts itself, right? With a sebum layer, this is kind of buffered because we have more of a layer of microbial activity and diversity that's protecting ourselves from the upper layers of bacteria. But this still presents nonetheless a problem and a potential risk factor for wearing clothes in here. So when I was talking about earlier about the groin area, we see this area is becoming hot and there's a lot of bacteria. So it's very prone to the same bacteria that gives way for body odor, but as well as just having lots of bacteria there and accumulation that might be hard to get rid of with just water. Again, I think I still would experiment to see if, what can happen here. Try to wash it off with your hands, use it as a scrubber, but it's pretty interesting. I also want to point out this quick analogy in that, water really is all you need to clean off things. Like if you think about it, if you're trying to clean a sidewalk, it might be not the best example, right? But if our argument for cleaning our bodies with soap is that we're getting rid of oil, getting rid of grime, getting rid of dirt, then it would make no sense why we had to use something like soap. When if we were to see a really dirty sidewalk and it was full of dirt and all sorts of just different gross things, poop and stuff, I don't know, dog poop, a really great way to get rid of that is just to power wash it all with the, pressure. Just water, a quick rinse will get it off. And the same way with our bodies, if we have things on our body that we're trying to get rid of, especially a lot of it is hydrolytic, right? Like they like water, it'd be easy to just get it off with water and a good scrub. So we don't need anything with soap unless we're actually truly oily, right? If the sidewalk was oily, we might need to get soap, but our bodies are actually rarely artificially oily or more than our sebums layer oily. So unless we're like in we've like swam in bacon grease or something, there's no need for us to use soap. Okay, so that's a point. That's the point I was saying about um, how our clothes trap bacteria. But this is also why when you're sweating, it'd be best to get out of the clothes right away, because if you don't, these sweat layers will have more time to interact with the various things, and if they go in here, they can cause inflammation. It's just not the most optimal thing, so it's better to get out of it than you don't. If you don't have the sebum layer, right, this can become a lot more risky. So the modern situation for most people is that they're going to be sweaty with the clothes on, and they don't even have the sebum layer because they wash it off with soap the day before. So now they just have these bacteria on the surface of their skin, or these hot droplets of water, forming more bacteria, right, because they're breeding grounds. And then they can also go down into these pathways and they can cause more inflammation. And there's no buffer anymore, so it's a lot easier for inflammation to happen. Um, that can cause altercations and further problems. So I think that's worth knowing. Okay, so that's the sweaty clothes thing. Um, I'll take a quick note before I talk about retinoids about the fact of why do our hands not have any problems? Why do we need to use soap on our hands? Um, and why does no problems occur with that? And the first thing is that, um, our hands in this modern world is often used to touch a lot of things. And so it's a matter of, transferring pathogens and so forth that may exist in this modern world. And the modern world, we have a bunch of, it's just like almost like a cultural thing that you have to kind of clean your hands and make sure they're fine wherever you go. But also the fact that they also do get greasy sometimes, right? You're working with grease or so forth. So washing your hands will become pretty important. Okay, but then why don't we get inflammation or um, you know pimples there? Is because I think it's commonly known and that just like skincare is that skin will form most likely on the most vulnerable parts on the body, which are the T zone. You have the forehead, the nose, um, as well as the chest. And these places are susceptible because they have a lot more sebum production. So if more, pimples are formed because you have too much sebum production and it's clogging up. So if you have more sebum production in these areas, then it's more likely that you'll have pimples there. But on the palms of our hand as well as the soles of our feet, there are actually no sebaceous glands, however you pronounce it. So you actually don't perspire. I mean, you don't have oil glands in your hands. So that means no pimples can form on your hands because you don't have anything to clog, right? So washing the palms is fine as long as we do. Even in the back of our hand, we have sebaceous glands, but not as much as we do compared to the T-zone or anywhere else on our body. So we can wash those without, a big risk of these being overproduced because our hands were kind of meant to be constantly, replenished in terms of high skin rate turnover. But you see, it will get dry, so you'll have to moisturize it. But that's like one of the only parts of the body then that you have to deal with the cycle of, draining and replenishing, and that'll go on. But that's just a quick tidbit about our hands and so forth. Hopefully, you could find that interesting and applicable to kind of what we're talking about. Oh my God, it's been 26 minutes. How? That's crazy. Okay, now we'll talk about retinols and retinoids. So retinols are derivative of vitamin A, and what they do really is you put them on your skin or you inject them, and they change uh, the DNA of the skin cell producers in some sense. And I think retinols have a big potential for usage, but I think if you were to just replenish the sebum layer, I think a lot of the use for retinols will not be as prevalent as you may think it is. But even in times of replenishing the sebum layer, and you still have these pimples that are not going away, that's probably because the pimple itself has kind of gained per se this kind of bad habit of producing too much sebum and skin cells, and it's kind of irreversible, even though the body is kind of produce this new sebum layer. So in that case, it may be necessary to use something that alters the genetic expression um, of these skin producers and sebum producers, which is what a retinoid can do. So in most cases, I would not recommend it until you get to the stage where you've weaned off um, the soap and you still have pimples. Okay, what does a retinoid do? Okay, you apply it, and this takes a long time. But what it will start to happen is that it'll do two things, and this kind of works in a contradictory nature. One, you'll hear on the web, it'll tell you a lot that it'll increase the turnover of skin cell production and sebum production, so that there's gonna be more turnover, so that'll clear up things faster. But what's actually happening is that the productions actually might be slowed down. Right now, this is going at hyperspeed, right? They're increasing a lot of skin cells, and it's clogging up this, so it's actually going pretty fast. But the thing is, this is getting clogged, so nothing can come out, so there's actually no turnover. So what the retinoid will slowly work on doing is that they make these skin cells less sticky and more, easily able to slip out of this narrow corner. So once they're able to slip out, you actually start to see some, the sebum coming out and the skin cells coming out, and so it just looks like there's more turnover. But in fact, the other part of the retinoid, what it's doing is it's telling the body, stop producing so much, stop going so crazy, stop going overboard, right? And so it'll make less of these. It'll turn over more in the top, and so the end product is that you're going to have just a more flowed skin production, sebum production, and won't get as many clogs. So this is why they say it helps acne, is because it'll remove these clogs by fixing the problem of the buildup of skin cells, and that should help this whole problem of this pimple forming in the first place. But again, I would advise against that because we don't need to do that unless it's the last measure we have to choose. Um, yeah, and that's what that does. And it also has other benefits of collagen and lifting up the epidermis, but that's not relevant in this talk of acne. But in terms of acne wise, that's what it does. Okay, so what does this look like in practicality? Um, when I think about this myself, what am I going to implement as a result of this knowledge? It's that, I suffer from acne myself in some parts of my body, and like especially my chest area. And I went to the doctor's office today, and they told me to get on a bunch of different medicines. There's like a whole routine of 6 different things, and I'm just thinking to myself, why do we live in a society where we have to use so many medicines on a body that should be able to regulate itself regularly? And so my solution to this idea is that let's take a break from all this stuff. Let's see what do we actually need for our bodies? A sort of pragmatic approach. And so what I'm gonna try to think of doing is that I'm gonna wean off the use of soap. Let the body come back to its regular production of sebum and see if that will help fix the redness, itchiness, rashness, and the inflammation that is happening on my skin so much in so many other places. And also wean off, just constantly tearing off all the layers of oil on my face as well as other parts of my body with all these sort of harsh abrasives. Um, just kind of be observant of what happens there. And I will say some disclaimers that we do live in a modern society which has different environmental differences. So if these strategies may not work for everybody. Um, removing oil, using water only may not work with people who have, seborrheic dermatitis, which is that, flaky redness, rashiness on their skin, or may not work with for, other people with other certain skin conditions, as well as people who, for shampoo wise, people who have really, I don't know, like really greasy hair that doesn't fix itself with stopping shampoo and also who may have a history of dandruff use may not be entirely susceptible to going completely off of it. And we had to trace this back to understanding that the environment we live in now is just so different in terms of skin health, right? Our skin is now constantly covered, you know, um, we're not exposed to elements, to nature at all, right? We don't have that much sunlight, so things like fungus in our hair can grow without being restricted, without the kind of the eliminating factors of sunlight, and the fact that we're sleeping in artificial fabrics and tightly wound clothes that allows for our hair to kind of not completely be checked and balanced by nature and all the things that the passive environment did for us in keeping our health in tip-top condition. So you may not be suitable for everybody, but still adapting principles from an evolutionary perspective can help us understand healthcare and what we should do for ourselves if we want to be as healthy as possible. And starting off with this simple kind of practice of abandoning this cycle of ruining and then replenishing our skin, instead just letting it work its own system out with a sort of reverence of the skin is, I think, is a good leap for what we can do. And as well as keeping these ideas that we talked about in mind in terms of remedies and what we can do. So it's not like cyclic acid. Cyclic acid is entirely innocuous or just like useless. It can still be used in situations where you have, like even with your natural sebum layer of removing those, pesky little blackheads and whiteheads that are not going away on their own. Um, or if you're getting inflammation at some point in time, benzoyl peroxide may be useful even if you've already had a sebum layer formulated, and retinoids, of course, can be used in these circumstances where even with a sebum layer you're still having these pimples being formed and you just can't get rid of it. It might have to lean towards those treatments, but for a large part we're actively causing our own problem. So to pay attention to that and realize what's actually happening may be a better use for us than just jumping straight in and being like yeah, let's ruin everything and add more problems to our mix, right? So yeah, I think that's all I have to say for today. um, Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I don't even know how it's been 35 minutes. I feel like it's only been like 20 minutes, but I hope you took something away from the video of value, and let me know in the comments if you think you did. Thank you very much.